So we are going to start on the bottom of I am Vavam we are going to start on the bottom of I am Vavam base. Today's Daf Yomi is Yevamos Ayin Zayin 77. And so we've been discussing that King David, they said, how do you know that King David is allowed to marry into the Jewish people? And they said, well, because what's the problem? He's a descendant of Ruth the Moabite. But Ruth the Moabite and Moabites are not allowed to marry in. So they say, no, Moaviv or Moavis. The prohibition is against a male Moabite. The prohibition against a male Ammonite, but not a female Moabite or female Ammonite. So then the response to that was, why? Why not it says a mamzer and a female mamzer is also prohibited. So they said, well, maybe it's based upon the verse because it says because the Moabites and the Ammonites did not bring out bread and water, and therefore they can't marry in. So who brings out bread and water into the wilderness? Only the males. So they say, why? The females could have also been responsible to bring it out. So therefore, so Avner, who was trying to defend David, was quiet. So we'll pick this up in the bottom of 76b. Vayomer Amelech, and so King Saul said to Avner, Sha'alata, B'mizeh Elam. He says, go to the base medrash and ask B'mizeh Elam. Literally, we translated, who is this? The son of whom is this youth? But the Gemara picks up, Hasam Karle Nar. Earlier, David was called a Nar, a lad, and Hachi Karle Elam. Now a different word is used. So the Gemara says, Hachi Kamrle. This is what he was saying to him. Halacha nis alma mimcha. Now halacha is he's missing the halacha. You forgot why. So say v'sha'al b'beis medrash. Go ask the beis medrash what's the story. Can David marry him? Amar way. So they said to David. They said to him, Amoni v'amo Amonis, Moavi v'amo Moavis. They said, no, of course he's allowed to marry in. Only a female Ammonite and a female Moabite is the male Ammonite and male Moabite is permitted, but the females are allowed. Top of 77a. Ikshu Doag the Edomite challenged them. Kohani Kushiusa. He asked all these difficult points. Ishtiko. In the end, the base members had no response. They were going to make a proclamation that David was not Jewish. He can't be the king. Miyad immediately, so immediately Amasa, who was with Avigal, the daughter of Nachash. Nachash was another name for Yishai, David's father. So because he only died because of the sin of the Nachash, he didn't die with his own sin. Immediately he got up, and Gemara explains earlier he was called. One place he's called the Israeli, and elsewhere he's called the Yeser Yishmaeli. So which is he? Hamarava Melamed. So what did Amasa do? Chagar Charbo ki Yishmael. He took up his sword like Yishmael. He says, Kol mi she'enu shomei halacha zu yidaker b'cheref. Whoever doesn't accept this halacha, I'm going to kill you with the sword. Well, that'll end the debate. Kach mekubwanimi beis dino shel Shmuel Ramas. He says, this is the tradition I received from Shmuel. Ammoni v'lo Ammonis, Moavi v'lo Moavis. Only a male Ammonite and a male Moabite is prohibited, but not the female. So we see from here, even King David, it was touch and go for a while, if he would be accepted. But why would we believe Amasa when he claims that this is the tradition? By the way, I'll tell you why they believed him, because he had a sword in his hand. But it's always saying like you're always more persuasive when you have a gun in your pocket, right? You ever hear that expression? I mean, not literally. Don't walk around with guns in your pocket to be persuasive, but that's the expression. Like you're always more persuasive when you're packing heat. So basically the point was, why did they believe him? Any Torah scholar who teaches a law and about an incident in Kodem Maisa, if he teaches the law before the incident, then we listen to him. But if he teaches the halacha after the incident, then we don't listen to him, because why should we listen to him? He obviously seems like he's biased or basing upon a specific case. So the Gemara says, Shani Ache. No, this case was different. Shmuel based Dino Kayam. Because Shmuel and his court were still around, and they could have said, no, you're lying. You're quoting us, misquoting us. So anyway, how was David allowed to marry in? Okay, Amasa had the sword. So how was he allowed to marry in? So they said, shouldn't the women have brought out the water to the Jewish women, and then they could have had water. So therefore, we don't marry them. This is teaching us the whole reason we're not marrying in is because they weren't they weren't kind. So the Gemara says no. Hachatir Gimel. There's an explanation here in Babylon. Kol kavuda bas melch panima. It's a verse that's often used to cite that women should not leave the home. The modesty of the woman is in the home. So therefore, even though they could have gone out just to give to the women, it still would have been immodest. Excuse me. B'marava Amri in Eretz Yisrael, they said, "V'tema Rabbi Yitzchak Amar Krav Vayomer Elav Vayesar Eshtecha Vayomer Neba'ol." Where was Sarah when the angels came? Sarah was remaining in the tent. The place of the woman was in the tent, and so therefore they had a good reason why they didn't go out. Gemara says, "Kitana." It's a dispute amongst the Tanaim. What's the source of the concept of why we don't accept why we do accept the female Ammonites? That Ammoni vo Ammonis. One is because the verse says the male Ammonites can't marry, but it doesn't say anything about the females. Moavi vo Moabis. That's the position of Divrei Rabbi Yehuda, whereas Rabbi Shimon says no. Rabbi Shimon Omer Advar Sharo Kidmu Aschem Belechem Uvemayim. Because the Ammonites, you can't marry into an Ammonite because they didn't bring you the bread and the water. Only the man was responsible to bring the bread and the water, not the woman. Rava expounded upon the following verse. Ma'idach said, what does David HaMelech mean when he says in Tehillim, Pitachto Mosei you release my chains? So it was, Amar David Lefnei HaKadosh Baruch Hu. God said, David said before God, Ribono Shel Olam, Master of the universe, Shnei Mosaros Hayu Alai. And pitachtem, I had two chains upon me, and you released them. Ruth Moabite, I came from Ruth the Moabite, and you solved that by saying only a male Moabite is prohibited. But Nama Ammonis, and Nama, who married Solomon, she was an Ammonis, and she gave birth to Rechavam, and that also you release. So David's lineage was sketchy, but it was allowed. What does it mean you did many things, God, your wonders and your thoughts? To me, it doesn't say Elenu, but to us. This teaches us that Rechavam was David's grandson, was sitting in his bosom. And these two verses, David said, was said about me and you. What do we do with the verse? That what does David say? I came with the scroll that was written about me. Amar David, I said, now I came. I didn't realize David thought I thought I just came now. I thought that just now was when I appeared, but I didn't realize when I was anointed, I thought now I came to greatness. And it was just came as a result of this. I didn't realize that it was already written about me from the days of Abraham that I was going to become king. Why? There it uses the word nimtzaot by Lot, and matzati David avdi b'shemen kachim meshachtiv. Here it says, I found my servant David and anointed him with oil. So now we're going to get into some halachic discussion. Now we're going to get into halachic discussion. So Amru Rabbi Yochanan Bas Ger Ammoni. So the daughter of an Ammonite Bas Ger Ammoni, the daughter of a so Ula said to Rabbi Yochanan, the daughter of an Ammonite convert, Kesher al Kahuna. That daughter of an Ammonite convert is allowed to marry a Kohen. And the Gemara's assumption here is that we're talking about an Ammonite who converted with his wife. His wife, Mrs. Ammonite, also converted with him, and that their daughter is allowed to marry a Kohen. Their daughter was born after they both converted, can marry a Kohen. So Amalei Rabbi Bar Ula, come on. Rabbi Bar Ula says to Ula, like, whom are you saying this? Yiku Rabbi Yehuda, if you want to say that Rabbi Yochanan is saying his position according to Rabbi Yehuda, it can't be. What does Rabbi Yehuda say? Bas ger zachar kabas chalal zachar. Rabbi Yehuda is of the position that even a male convert's offspring is going to be considered like the offspring of a halal and can't marry a Kohen. So for sure it doesn't work according to Rabbi Yehuda. The Ik Rabbi Yossi, and if you're saying this according to Rabbi Yossi, Pshita, well, it's obvious that she can marry a Kohen. Ha'amar, Rabbi Yochanan himself had said, Rabbi Yossi himself had said, Af ger shemasak yoros pito ksher l'kahuna, that a convert who marries another convert, their offspring can marry a Kohen. And what do you even have to tell us? It's so obvious. Maybe you want to say that Rabbi Yossi only said his law by regular converts, but by Ammonites they can't marry in general. So, but in this case, because the Ammonites can't marry in, maybe he didn't say it. No, on what basis would Rabbi Yochanan be saying that we would think it wouldn't be okay? From the Kohen Gadol Ba'amana, from the fact that if a Kohen Gadol marries a widow, that their offspring is considered to be a halal and cannot, and from that case, as their offspring is halal and is disqualified to marry a Kohen, it's fundamental difference. Male Kohen Gadol Ba'amana shekim biyasa ba'avera. That's a prohibited union. Whereas a male Ammonite and a female Ammonite is not a prohibited union. So it makes sense that the Kohen Gadol and the widow's offspring will be prohibited to marry a Kohen. So maybe from a halal, maybe we think from a halal, yochiach, why? What's a halal? The halal is the offspring of a Kohen in a prohibited union. So their offspring is considered a halal. And what do we say about a halal? We say that he's allowed to marry a Jewish girl and the union is not prohibited, but nevertheless, his offspring is disqualified to marry a Kohen. So we say maybe that's why Rabbi Yochanan has to teach us the law. No, but Mal Halal Shekain Yitzirasu Ba'avera, the Halal himself was created in sin, whereas the Ammonites are not created in sin. So the Gemara says, well, Kohen Gadol Yochel, we'll back to Kohen Gadol, and now we have this case, this formula, Chazar Din Lo Rizek Rizeh Lo Rizek Rizeh. What's the common denominator? Atzad Shava Shabahen. Let's take it from the combination of the Kohen Gadol and the halal. What's the combination? The common denominator. She'eno berov kahal, that both of them are not regularly allowed to marry in. The halal and they're both not part of the regular community, and also the Ammonite. Ubito pesula. The common denominator is that they're not like the rest of the Jewish people because they both have this defective aspect to them. The Kohen Gadol was a prohibited union with the widow, and the halal was created in sin. And so both of their offspring is going to be prohibited. Their daughter cannot marry a Kohen. Afkan, so too the Ammonites, that they're not considered part of the regular community. So therefore, we should say Bito Pesula, their offspring should not be allowed to marry a Kohen. Where we rejects that because Malatzad Shavben, Kain Yesh Ben Sadavera. But the difference is the Ammonite is not committing any sin, but whereas the Halal and the Kohen Gadol and the widow, they committed a sin. So therefore, Gemara says, okay, let's change the scenario that we were talking about. Now, Ula was not asking Rabbi Yochanan about a case where a male Ammonite married a female Ammonite, but rather, what's he asking about? Dilma Vadai, Dilma Ba'amoni Shenase Ba'as Yisrael Kamas. We're talking about a male Ammonite married a regular Jewish girl. And we say, Avagav to be also Ba'avera, even though they're not allowed to have a union, they're Bito Keshera. Rabbi Yochanan says that their offspring is allowed to marry a Kohen. And that's what Rabbi Yochanan was saying. That's the case. A male Ammonite and a female Jewish, their offspring, the female offspring can marry a Kohen. So the Gemara says, I'm really in that Rabbi Yochanan said, yep, that's what I was talking about. The Chiyasa, so he said that's what indeed what Rabbi Yochanan was talking about. That's what Ula said to his son, Rabbi Ula. He said, yeah, that's exactly what I asked him about. The Chiyasa Rabin, and this was exactly the scenario when Rabin came, he said, Amar Rabbi Yochanan, Bas Ger Ammoni, Ubas Mitri Sheni. Let's say you have the daughter of an Ammonite. Let's say you have the daughter of an Ammonite and the daughter of a Bas Geramoni Ubas Mitzri Sheni. Let's say you have the daughter of an Ammonite male or the daughter of a second generation Egyptian. Egyptians also cannot marry in for three, so you can't until the third generation. A big shkoyach to Dov Bear here for pointing that out. So Rabbi Yochanan says, Kisher, Rabbi Yochanan says that their daughter is kosher to marry a Kohen, and Rish Lakish says she's Pesua, she is disqualified. Rish Lakish says that their offspring of a male Ammonite or a second generation Egyptian is disqualified because we learn out Kohen Gadol Ba'amana from a widow to a Kohen Gadol. Rabbi Yochanan says it's kosher. And how do we know that Rabbi Yochanan says it's kosher? And what Gemara says, we're going to derive it from the following incident. We're in the top of 77b. The Tani Rabbi Zakkai commends Rabbi Yochanan. Once Rabbi Zakkai was teaching in front of Rabbi Yochanan. It says in the verse about a Kohen Gadol, it says, Kim Suame Amavi Kachisha. He has to marry a virgin. Mahavi Kioras Minkana. This comes to include that the Kohen Gadol is allowed to marry a Kioras, a convertess, from her kana, from her nest. Rashi says that's talking about where both her father and mother converted from the same tribe. So they both were from one nation, and she was born in holiness. The Kohen Gadol is allowed to marry into her. Shehi kasher l'kahuna. That's what Rabbi Zakkai said. And Rabbi Yochanan responded. Rabbi Yochanan responded to this teaching. Ani shoneh amav me'amav. I learn out from the fact that the verse could have said Kim B'sula me'amav and Kim B'sula amav, but instead it says me'amav. I learn out from here Lahavi B'sula Abba Mibeis Amam. I learn out from here that Kohen Gadol can also marry a virgin who comes from two nations. Va'ato meres kiyoros mikana v'sula. When you say only from a convert mikana, where both her parents converted before she was born. So what was Rabbi Yochanan saying? Ma'ishnei amamin. What does it mean that I say that you can even marry a girl who was born from two nations? Anyway, if you want to say Amoni Shanas Amonis, if you want to say Rabbi Yochanan is saying, I say even a male Ammonite who married a female Ammonite, and what does it mean when it says you can marry the two nations, Disharm, Asurin, and the Kavos and the Taurus, that the male Ammonite, that the Ammonites are considered two nations because the males are prohibited and the females are permitted? Well, that would be Haynu Gioros Mikana. Well, that's exactly the case of the Gioros Mikana. That's exactly the case of what we were talking about on top of 77b. That's the two Ammonite parents. So it must be all about Moni Shanasab Yisrael. Rabbi Yochanan saying, I say even in the situation where the male Ammonite marries a Jewish girl, the offspring can marry the Kohen. Even though that union was prohibited, the offspring can marry a Kohen. And that's what Rabbi Yochanan was saying. And so that's how we know that that's Rabbi Yochanan's position. Or alternatively, the Ikeda Amri, alternative version of this conversation was Amrle, Ani Shoneh Amav Me'amav. Rabbi Yochanan was saying, I learn out, I derive it, and Amav Me'amav. I derive it, the word Amav Me'amav, from the fact that it could have just said Amav and it says Me'amav, Havi, in order to bring about the case of Bisua Abba Mishnei Amamim. I bring it out to teach us that even if it's a virgin that comes from two unions, from two nations, that she can also marry a Kohen. And you say only the Giores, only the convert from two parents. And according to the second expression, it also includes the case of a Bas Mitzri Sheni, the offspring of an Egyptian, from a second generation Egyptian, to Kshero Kahuna, that she can marry she can marry a Kohen. Rashi says a second generation Egyptian who married a Jewish girl and they had a prohibited union. Well, the Rabbi Yochanan says that their offspring can marry a Kohen. So Menole, what's the source from it? The Chitim, if you want to say the Yoaf me Ammoni Shenasa Bas Yisrael, if you want to say learn out from the Ammonite who marries a Jewish girl, you can't learn out from there because Mala Ammoni Shenasa Bas Yisrael Shekane Kabbas Mitoros. There's a fundamental difference. All female Ammonites are permitted, so therefore maybe the Ammonite is more lenient than the second generation Egyptian. So maybe you want to learn out from the Mitzri Sheni Shenasa Mitzri Shnia. Maybe you learn out from the second generation Egyptian male who marries a second generation female that their offspring is permitted. Mala Mitzri Sheni, maybe if you want to learn out from there, but that case is also different because Mala Mitzri Sheni Shenasa Mitzri Shnias. That's not a prohibited union. The two second generation Egyptians, they're allowed to be together. So if you want to go back to then go back the other way. Ammoni Shenasa Bas Yisrael Yochiach, and then we're the same thing. What's the common denominator? So common denominator is that they're both not completely completely part of the community, and their daughters will be permitted. So I'm Rav Yosef, and Rav Yosef says, this is why I once heard that the teaching from Rav Yehuda, what did Rav Yehuda say? He said, Amav me'amav goya dana my kamer. He said, I heard that Rabbi Yochanan said something about Amav me'amav, but I didn't know what it meant. And now I know it means that if a male Ammonite marries a female Jew, that their offspring, if it's a female, can marry a Kohen. He said, this is what was actually said in front of Rabbi Yochanan. Isha monis keshira. He said the following. This is what they said in front of Rabbi Yochanan. A female Ammonis is allowed. Bina me'ammoni is possible. Her son from an Ammonite is disqualified. Ubita me'ammoni keshera. And her daughter from an Ammonite is keshera. And now the Gemara is going to analyze what this statement means. What is it talking about? Are we talking about Ammoni v'Ammonish in Iskairu, that if it's a male and female Ammonite that converted together, that is going to be okay, their offspring. Of Obita me'ammoni psua, but if it's a Jewish girl and male Ammonite, that will be prohibited. Amarle, so Rabbi Yochanan said, Puk tani levra. Rabbi Yochanan said you're wrong when he heard this, because my the Amris, what were you saying? Isha Amonis Keshera. That what you said, that a woman Amonis is Keshera. That refers to Amoni v'lo Amonis. What you said, that a female Amonis is Keshera. Well, that makes sense, because we know that only a male Ammonite is prohibited, but not a female. That what you said, but not Amoni is possible. That what you said, a male Ammonite is disqualified. If it's her son, that's obvious. The Ammonihu, because he's an Ammonite and he's disqualified. But then what she says, Ubita me Ammoni kasher, that what she says, and her daughter from an Ammonite is kosher. Well, what is she kosher for? You mean she can marry a Jew? Well, of course she can. Ashta ima ksheri, a female Ammonite can marry a Jew. So Himi Bai, so why do we have to mention anything about her? Ella Kahuna. So it must mean she can marry a Kohen. And what are you talking about? Do you mean that a male and female that converted? But if it's and that's talking about a male and a female that converted. But then when it says that a daughter from an Ammonite is disqualified, what does that mean? My bita me Ammoni. What does it mean that it's disqualified? If you want to say if a male marries a female Ammonite, that they are Hainu Geras Mikana. We already said that that's permitted. So it must be that you're saying Ammoni Shanas Abbas Yisrael. You must be talking about an Ammonite who marries the daughter of a Jew, that she's prohibited. That's not true. Rabbi Yochanan says, "Puk Tani Abra, go teach us outside." It's not true. A male Ammonite who marries a female Jew, their offspring can marry a Kohen. So basically, this whole daf has said 3 different ways how we know that Rabbi Yochanan's of the position that if a male Ammonite marries a female Jew, that their offspring can marry a Kohen. So now the Gemara says, we had said in our Mishnah that a Mitzri and a Mitzri cannot marry in for 3 generations. Until the 3rd generation, the Egyptians cannot marry in, a Mitzri and a Edomi. And however, we had said that a male Ammonite cannot marry forever. So the rabbi said, the female Ammonite can marry, and female Moabite can marry. And but the Egyptian prohibition applies to both males and females. Whereas Rabbi Shimon said, no, the female Egyptians are like the Ammonites; they can marry in right away. And the rabbi said, we have a response to that argument. And he says, I have a response to your argument. That's what he said. So the Gemara says, my tshuva, what was their response to Rabbi Shimon? The rabbi said, we could respond to you. Look at sexual prohibitions of relatives, that they last 3 generations and they apply to both male and female. It applies to both males and females. So don't say, since it's only 3 generations, it only applies to males and not females. Because a man's granddaughter is prohibited to him. So the Gemara says, but Rabbi Shimon responds, but Arayos is different. Sexual prohibitions of relatives, shekin kares. Well, that's a punishment if you marry them of kares. So the Gemara says, well, moms are yochel. So the rabbi says the moms are approved. So Rabbi Shimon responds, Mala moms are shekin in a row. Okay, moms are placed a male and a female, but they can never marry into the community. So the Gemara says the same idea. What's the common denominator? It's not a shavashaben. They're both prohibited to both male and female. So to bring the male and the female Egyptians, and the Egyptian should also be applied to both male and females. And Rabbi Shimon responds, no. He says, no, both of those cases, the relatives and the moms there's some element of kares related to it. So that's why Rabbi Shimon says, I don't accept this idea that it applies to the males and the females. So the Gemara says, the Rabbanan responded, why did the rabbi say applies to the males and females? The Rabbanan learned it out from Mechalol. The rabbis learn it out, Mechalol d'chai ve'aseh, because there is a positive commandment that if a Kohen does not marry a virgin, there's a positive commandment he's supposed to marry a virgin, and the offspring becomes a halal. So we see that there could be a halal like positive commandments, and like Rabbi Elazar ben Yaakov, who states that a Kohen who marries a woman is prohibited to have, even by a positive commandment, the offspring is a halal and prohibited to marry a Kohen. And so therefore that was their argument. And so therefore that was their argument to Rabbi Shimon. They say Arayos will prove it, that they're prohibited until 3rd generations. Nevertheless, it's going to be, the Torah prohibits the males and females. And if you'll say, well, Arayos has kares, so we'll say, no, there's a halal. There's where it's just a positive commandment, but applies to males and females together. And so too applies to the Egyptians. The Egyptian prohibition applies to male and females together. So, and what does Rebbe Lezer say? He says, whoa, he says, it's freely the Rebbe Lezer ben Yaakov. He says, I don't even agree with Rebbe Lezer ben Yaakov that there's this idea that from a positive commandment makes a chol. But according to you, who do hold like him, Ani Omer, I'll say that this is halacha. Ani Omer, I'll say that this is a law. We basically have a tradition that the Egyptians applies, the prohibition that's marrying an Egyptian applies only to a male Egyptian, but not to a female Egyptian. You can marry a female Egyptian right away. And Tanya, and then Rabbi Shimon says, halacha Ani Omer. Rabbi Shimon says, I have a halacha that teaches this, and furthermore, Mikrani Misayeni. He says, furthermore, I have a verse to support me, and the verse will deal with tomorrow. With the verse is Banim below Banos. That the verse states, what does the verse state? The verse states, Banim Asher Yuvaldu Am Dor Shlishi Yavohena. That up to the third generation they can marry in. And we see from here that it's only boys have to wait to the third generation, not the girls. But I'm going to take questions. I'll take questions.